The flowers were still in her hair when the world ended. White winter blossoms, woven into Willa's dark braid that morning by hands that had trembled. Her own hands, clumsy with nerves and something she hadn't yet recognized as dread. She had told herself the trembling was excitement. She had told herself a great many things that day. Now she stood at the edge of the forest, alone. Those same flowers slowly wilting against the cold, and she understood that she had been lying to herself for a very long time. The ceremony was over. She had watched every second of it. She had stood among the crowd in the great stone courtyard of Ashenvale, the village carved between two mountains, where winters lasted 9 months and people learned early to endure. And she had watched Edmund take Sarah's hand at the altar. Edmund, with his careful smile and his clean jaw and the familiar scent of cedar and smoke that Willa had believed, for 3 years, belonged to her. Sarah, her cousin, in a dress the color of new cream, her golden hair catching the pale winter light like something designed to be looked at. No one had told Willa. That was the thing she kept returning to, even now, even as the cold crept up through the soles of her worn boots and into her bones. No one had pulled her aside, the night before, or the week before, or the month before, and said, "Willa, something has changed." She had received her invitation to the wedding the same as everyone else. She had assumed it was another celebration. Edmund's family held them often. She had braided flowers into her hair. She had walked into the courtyard and seen the altar, and understood in the space of one breath that she was not the bride. Sarah had glanced at her once, across the crowd. A brief look, almost apologetic, before she turned back to Edmund and smiled the way people smile when they have already decided something and simply need the world to confirm it. Willa had not made a sound. She was proud of that, in the hollow, quiet way of someone who has nothing left to be proud of. She had stood through the whole of it, the vows, the blessing of the village elder, the scattering of pine ash over the joined hands. And then, when the crowd began to move toward the feast tables, she had simply walked the other direction, into the forest, into the cold. The trees of the Ashenvale wood were ancient things, their trunks wider than 2 men standing arms outstretched, their bark the deep gray of old iron. Snow sat heavy on every branch. The path Willa followed was not really a path at all, just the absence of undergrowth, a narrow corridor between roots and stone. She did not know how long she walked. Long enough for the sounds of the village to disappear. Long enough for her fingers to go numb inside her thin wool gloves. She stopped when she reached the frozen stream. It cut across the forest floor like a scar, the ice thick and pale blue, the snow piled high on either bank. Willa sat down on a flat rock at the edge of it, not caring that the cold stone pressed through her skirt immediately, not caring about much of anything. She looked at her own reflection in the ice, a dim, distorted version of herself, dark eyes, hollow cheeks, the wilting flowers still ridiculous in her hair. She pulled them out, let them fall onto the snow beside her feet. She was 23 years old. She had given Edmund 3 years. 3 years of quiet faithfulness, of turning down the small attentions of other men, of learning to cook the way his mother cooked and laugh at the particular jokes he liked. She had believed in something, and the thing she had believed in had not existed. And now she was sitting on a frozen rock in the woods while the village feasted without her, and she did not know what to do next. The cold was getting serious now. The light was shifting, that particular gray gold of a winter afternoon already beginning to surrender to dusk. Willa knew she should go back. She had nowhere to go back to exactly. Her small room above the tanner's workshop, which she rented in exchange for keeping the man's accounts, was hardly a comfort. But the forest at night in deep winter was a different matter entirely. Wolves moved through these woods. Not only the ordinary kind. She was standing, brushing snow from her skirt, when she heard it. Not a sound. A stillness. A change in the quality of the air around her, the way sound changes when something very large and very quiet moves nearby. Willa turned slowly. He stood at the tree line, perhaps 20 feet away, and he was watching her. She had seen powerful men before. Ashenvale had its elder, its council, the occasional traveling lord who passed through on the mountain road. But this was different in a way she felt in her chest, before she understood it in her mind. He was tall, significantly taller than any man she knew, dressed in dark traveling leathers, a heavy cloak the color of charcoal hanging from his shoulders, fur-lined and thick with road dust. His dark hair was wind-roughened. His jaw was set with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to control every visible thing about himself. His eyes, across the distance and the dimming light, were gold, not amber, not brown. Gold, the way firelight is gold when you look directly into it. He did not move. He simply looked at her, and the looking had a weight to it, a pressure, as though the air between them had changed composition. Willa's first instinct was fear, a rational response to finding a large, unknown man watching her alone in the woods in winter. Her second instinct, arriving almost simultaneously and confusing her considerably, was that he was not going to hurt her. She didn't know why she thought this. Nothing about his appearance suggested gentleness. Everything about him suggested the opposite. But he had not moved. He was simply watching. "You've been standing there for some time," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, perhaps because she had already spent her capacity for feeling undone today, and there was nothing left to spend. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise. Something closer to recalibration, as if she had responded to a test in a way he had not anticipated. "I have," he said. His voice was low even, with the careful control of someone who has learned that volume is not the same as authority. "I wasn't certain you'd notice." "The forest went quiet," Willa said. "Things go quiet around predators." Another shift. This one was harder to read. He took one step forward, out of the tree shadow, and the last light caught him fully. And Willa saw that there was blood on his sleeve, dark and dried, and that he was holding his left side with a stillness that was not natural, the controlled stillness of someone managing pain. "You're hurt," she said. "It's old," he said, in the tone of a man who does not discuss such things. "It's bleeding through your cloak," she said, in the tone of a woman who has noticed. He looked down at his side. Something passed over his face. Not embarrassment, exactly, but the shadow of a man who is unaccustomed to being observed accurately. He looked back up at her, and there was the gold of his eyes again, steady and strange. "You should not be in these woods," he said. "Not at this hour." "Nor should you, apparently," Willa said, nodding toward his side. The silence between them stretched. Snow fell in the last gray light, soft and indifferent. Somewhere deep in the trees, something moved. And whatever it was, it moved away, quickly, which told her something about the man standing before her that no introduction could have communicated more clearly. "What is your name?" he asked. She considered not answering. Then she thought about the empty feast and the wilted flowers and Edmund's careful smile at the altar, and she decided she had no patience left for performing caution. "Willa," she said. "What is yours?" He looked at her for a long moment, as though the question was one he was deciding how to answer, rather than simply answering. "Leander," he said. No title, no explanation. Just the name, offered the same way she had offered hers, plain, without ornament. Willa picked up her shawl from where it had slipped off the rock, wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked at the blood on his cloak, at the controlled way he held himself, at the gold eyes that had not left her face since the moment she'd turned around. "There's a healer on the eastern edge of Ashen Vale," she said. "If you follow the stream south, you'll reach the road. Third house past the mill." She turned to walk back the way she had come. "You have flowers," he said behind her. "In your hair still." Willa's steps slowed. She reached up and found one small blossom she had missed. still caught in a loose strand near her temple. She pulled it free, held it for a moment. That small cold thing, that small ruined thing. Then she let it fall and kept walking. She did not look back, but she felt his gaze on her shoulders all the way, until the trees swallowed her. A warmth that had no right to exist in the middle of a winter, that had already taken everything from her. Willa did not sleep that night. She lay on the narrow cot in her room above the tanner's workshop, listening to the distant sounds of the wedding feast. Laughter carried on wind, the low thrum of a fiddle, boots on frozen ground. The smell of cured hide and oak bark filled the small space, familiar enough that she usually didn't notice it anymore. Tonight she noticed everything. The rough wool of her blanket, the single candle burning low on the windowsill, the way the cold pressed against the shutters like something patient and persistent, looking for a way in. She thought about Edmund exactly once, and then she made a deliberate choice not to think about him again. Not because the hurt wasn't there. It was, a dull, deep bruise behind her sternum. But because she recognized, in the quiet clarity that sometimes follows devastation, that grieving Edmund would mean pretending she had lost something real. And the more she examined the last 3 years, the more she understood that what she had lost was not a man, but an idea. A direction. A future she had arranged in her mind without ever truly questioning whether it was the future she wanted. She thought about Leander considerably more than once. This bothered her. He was a stranger, an injured stranger who had been watching her in the woods, which, in ordinary circumstances, would be alarming rather than interesting. She could not account for the steadiness she had felt in his presence, that sense, irrational and stubborn, that whatever danger existed in the world, it was not coming from him. She turned the brief conversation over in her mind like a stone, examining its edges. "You have flowers in your hair still." He had said it without cruelty, without mockery, simply an observation, offered gently, as though he understood what the flowers meant and knew better than to say so directly. She told herself she was only thinking about him because he was the only interesting thing that had happened in an otherwise catastrophic day. She almost believed it. Morning came gray and heavy, the sky the color of unpolished pewter, the kind of sky that meant more snow before midday. Willa dressed in her warmest things, a dark wool dress, thick stockings, the boots she'd resoled herself with scraps from the workshop below, and went down to begin the day's accounts before the tanner arrived. She was halfway through the ledger when she heard voices below the workshop window. 2 of the village women, passing on the lane. Willa recognized both. Marta, the miller's wife, broad and generous, and constitutionally incapable of keeping information to herself, and the younger one, Dina, who worked at the inn. "Came in last night," Dina says. "Took the private room without blinking at the price. Alone?" "Alone. But she says his horse..." Marta's voice dropped to the register she used for things she considered significant. His horse had the king's mark on the saddlecloth, the black wolf, silver thread. She saw it herself. A pause. The crunch of boots on frozen snow. "The Alpha King's men don't come to Ashenvale," the younger voice said. "Not his men," Marta said. "Her. She says it was him, the king himself, traveling without court, without guard. Just a cloak and a horse and blood on his sleeve," she said. Dina near fainted when she saw it. Their voices faded as they moved down the lane. Willa sat very still with the ledger open in her lap. The Alpha King. She knew the name the way everyone in the mountain villages knew it. Not personally, not closely, but as a fact of the world, like weather or stone. Leander of the Northern Pax, who had united 7 fractured territories in 6 years, through a combination of methods that the stories described differently, depending on who was telling them. Some said ruthlessness. Some said brilliance. Some said he possessed gifts beyond ordinary wolves, sight that extended beyond the physical, a bond sense so acute he could feel the emotional state of every wolf in his territory like a chord of music. The stories agreed on one thing. He was not a man to be underestimated, and he was not a man who went anywhere without reason. What reason brought him to Ashenvale? A village of 300 souls wedged between two mountains, notable for nothing except the quality of its pine resin and the stubbornness of its people. She could not imagine. She closed the ledger, opened it again, stared at a column of numbers that suddenly meant very little. Just the name, offered plain. No title. No explanation. She thought. He could have told her who he was. He had chosen not to. She thought. That was either courtesy or strategy, and she wasn't sure which. She saw him again before noon. She hadn't gone looking. She had gone to the market stalls on the main lane to purchase a measure of oats and a paper of salt, ordinary errands that she had done every week for 2 years, and he was simply there, standing at the edge of the square near the stone well, dressed in the same dark leathers with a fresh cloak, this one less road-worn, watching the village with the quiet attention of a man cataloging details. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. She felt it, a small, specific shift in awareness, like a sound pitched at a frequency she recognized. She almost turned away. The part of her that was sensible and bruised and had spent the previous night talking herself into composure almost managed it. But her feet, it seemed, had made a different decision, and she was walking toward him before she had fully agreed to do so. "You found the healer," she said, stopping a few feet away, nodding toward his side. He stood differently this morning, easier, without the controlled stillness of managed pain. "I did," he said. She was not pleased to be woken. "Etta is never pleased," Willa said, "but she's effective. And she told me I was fortunate the wound hadn't gone deeper." He paused. "She also told me I was a fool for traveling alone." "She tells everyone that," Willa said. "She told the blacksmith he was a fool for hammering with a cracked anvil. She told the elder he was a fool for planting rye on the north slope. She's usually right." Something in his expression loosened slightly. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. The suggestion that somewhere beneath the controlled surface, a smile was architecturally possible. "Are you always this direct?" "I was raised by a practical woman," Willa said. "She believed that soft words were a kindness you gave the dying. Everyone else deserved the truth." "And where is she now, this practical woman?" A small pause. 3 winters passed, Willa said. "The fever." "I'm sorry," he said, and the words were simple and unornamented, without the performative sympathy she had learned to expect from people who didn't know what else to say. He sounded like a man who understood what loss was and did not try to decorate it. The square moved around them. Villagers with baskets and bundles, a boy leading a gray mule, the smell of bread from the baker's open door mixing with pine smoke and cold air. Ordinary morning sounds. And yet the space between herself and this man felt separate from all of it. Quieter, with a quality of attention that Willa could not name. "Why are you in Ashenvale?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "Passing through," he said. "To where?" "North." "There's nothing north of here except the Greymoor Pass," she said, "and the pass has been closed since the first snow." He said nothing. "You're not passing through," Willa said, the almost smile again. "You noticed." "The forest goes quiet around predators," she said, "and predators don't stop moving without reason." He was quiet for a moment, studying her with those gold eyes that gave nothing away, and at the same time gave everything away because they were too focused, too deliberate. The eyes of a man who had already decided something and was waiting for the right moment. "There is something in Ashenvale that requires my attention," he said carefully. "I am not yet ready to explain what it is." Willa considered this answer. It was honest. She could feel that it was honest, which was interesting, because she couldn't usually feel such things. It was incomplete, clearly, but it was not a lie dressed as an answer. "All right," she said. He blinked. "All right?" "You're not obligated to explain yourself to me," she said. I'm nobody in particular." She picked up her basket and turned to continue toward the market stalls. Behind her, she heard him say, quiet, almost too quiet to catch, something that sounded less like a statement and more like a correction spoken to himself. "That," he said softly, "is not true." Willa kept walking, but for the second time in 2 days, she felt his gaze follow her long after she had turned away. And for the second time, it felt less like being watched and more like being found. Across the square, half hidden in the shadow of the inn's doorway, a figure in a dark coat observed the entire exchange. Older, sharp-eyed, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm, but from calculation. He watched the Alpha King's gaze follow the dark-haired woman through the market, and his expression, unobserved, shifted into something cold and quietly interested. The name of the man in the doorway was Crest. Willa had known him her whole life, the way you know furniture in a room you've lived in too long. Not with affection, but with the dull familiarity of something always present. He was her uncle by her mother's sister's marriage, which made him almost family, and actually nothing. He managed the village council's accounts, wore the same dark coat in every season, and had a way of appearing at the edges of conversations he had not been invited to join. She had never trusted him without knowing exactly why. She knew why, now. It came back to her that afternoon, while she was restacking the tanner's supply shelves. One of those memories that sits quietly in the back of the mind for years, until something disturbs the water, and it rises, whole and cold, to the surface. She had been perhaps 14, her mother still alive and sharp-eyed, and she had come home to find Crest sitting at their table with a document she hadn't been allowed to read. Her mother had sent her outside immediately, which was unusual enough that Willa had pressed her ear to the gap in the shutters. She had heard very little. Only fragments. Her mother's voice, low and controlled. "She doesn't know, and she won't." And Crest's voice, the one he used when he wanted something. "That may not be your choice to make, Helene." Her mother had died before Willa thought to ask about it. And grief had a way of pressing other things flat. Now, sorting dried pine resin into clay jars by lamplight, Willa found herself wondering what it was her mother had not wanted her to know, and whether Crest, standing in the shadow of the inn doorway watching a king speak to her niece, had something to do with the answer. The snow came that evening, as promised by the sky. By the time Willa bolted the workshop shutters, the lane outside had disappeared under 3 inches of fresh white, and the cold had dropped to the serious kind, the kind that made the wood of the window frames contract and groan. She was heating water over the small iron brazier in her room when someone knocked at the door below. She assumed it was the tanner, who occasionally forgot things. She pulled her shawl tighter and went down. It was not the tanner. Leander stood in her doorway with snow on his shoulders and an expression that suggested he had arrived at this decision through a process that was not entirely comfortable for him. Behind him, the lane was empty and white and silent. "This is unusual," Willa said. "Yes," he agreed. "How did you know where I lived?" The healer mentioned it. "Edda told you where I live." After significant reluctance, he said, "and a considerable lecture about the impropriety of men who ask such questions." Despite everything, despite the strangeness of him on her threshold in a snowstorm, despite the day and the wedding and the sleepless night, Willa felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite a laugh, the ghost of one. She stepped back from the door. He came in, ducking slightly under the low frame, and stood in the narrow entry while she closed out the cold. The space immediately felt smaller. Not uncomfortably so, but noticeably. The way a room feels different when something significant occupies it. "There is something I need to tell you," he said. "I would have preferred more time. I don't have it." Willa folded her arms across her chest. "Then tell me." He looked at her steadily. The lamplight caught his eyes and held there, and she thought again about fire. About how fire, looked at directly, was one of the few things that looked back. "Your mother's name was Helene Voss," he said. "Before she married your father, before she came to Ashenvale, she was part of a different world, one she left deliberately." He paused. Her grandmother was the last true bloodkeeper of the Voss line. Willa said nothing. The word bloodkeeper landed in the room with a particular weight. She knew it, distantly, from old stories. Women who carried in their blood a rare gift among wolf kind, not the shift, not the strength, but something older. The ability to recognize bonds, to feel the truth of a mate connection the way ordinary wolves could not, to see it clearly without confusion, the way you see something in full light. That line was thought to be gone, Leander continued. Helene disappeared from the northern packs 30 years ago. Everyone assumed she had died. No one knew she had come here and built a quiet life and had a daughter. His jaw tightened slightly. I learned the truth only recently, from records that should have been destroyed but weren't. Willa's voice came out very careful. You're saying the gift passed to me. I'm saying it's possible. I'm saying there are people who believe it, and belief alone is enough to make you valuable to the wrong kind of person. He held her gaze. And I'm saying that Crest, your mother's brother-in-law, who sits on this village council, has been in contact with a man named Dorian Fell for the better part of 2 years. The name meant nothing to her. She said so. It will, Leander said, and there was something in his voice when he said it. Not threat, but the particular gravity of someone delivering a truth they wish they didn't have to deliver. Dorian Fell is the reason I'm traveling north. He has been quietly moving through the border territories for 3 years, collecting leverage. Old bloodlines, old gifts, old debts, building something. I don't yet know the full shape of it, but I know that when his name appears near a village, it is not coincidence. And his name appeared near Ashenvale 2 months ago. Willa sat down on the bottom step of the narrow stair. Not because she felt faint. She didn't. But because standing suddenly seemed like unnecessary effort. You came here looking for my mother's line, she said. I came here to determine whether it had survived and whether it was in danger. A pause. Brief, and waited. I found both answers quickly. She looked up at him. How quickly? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. The moment you turned around by the frozen stream. The room was very still. Snow tapped softly against the shutters. The brazier crackled. Willa thought about what it meant. Really meant. Past the shock of it. That this man had come to her village looking for a remnant bloodline, and had found her sitting alone in the woods, with wilted flowers, and an expression she hadn't been trying to hide. She thought about her mother saying she doesn't know, and she won't. She thought about Crest's face in the doorway, the cold calculation in it. My mother knew, Willa said. It was not a question. I think she knew, Leander said, and I think she chose to protect you from it by keeping you outside of it entirely. And Crest? Crest has known at least as long as your mother did, possibly longer. Willa pressed her palms flat against her knees and thought about the document at the table, 30 years old now in memory. That may not be your choice to make, Helene. He had known. All these years he had known what she was, and he had said nothing. And he had positioned himself close enough to act when the time came. And the time, apparently, had come. Edmund, she said suddenly, and the name felt strange in her mouth, smaller than it had yesterday. Edmund and Sarah. She stopped. Leander watched her work through it, and she could see that he already knew, and that he had been deciding whether to tell her. Crest arranged it, she said. Not a question this time either. Leander's expression answered before he did. He needed you isolated, he said quietly. Alone. Without alliance. Without someone who might protect you or complicate access to you. Edmund was receptive to arrangements when the right pressure was applied. The hurt was still there. She wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. But it changed shape in the space of that moment, became something smaller and more manageable. Because a hurt that comes from someone else's cowardice is different from a hurt that comes from your own foolishness. Edmund had not stopped loving her. Edmund had been afraid of something larger than love. She understood that. She didn't forgive it. But she understood it. "What happens now?" she asked. Leander crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level in a gesture that felt deliberate, chosen, not careless. Closer than he had been before. Close enough that she could see the texture of old scars at his jaw and the absolute steadiness in his gold eyes. "Now," he said, "I would like your permission to keep you safe. Not because of what your blood may carry, because you are in danger, and I am capable of addressing that, and because—" He stopped. Something moved across his face, unguarded and quickly controlled. "Because I would like to." Willa looked at him for a long moment. "You should know," she said, "that I am not easy to manage." "I know," he said. And this time, the almost smile became a real one, brief, quiet, and entirely genuine. "I'm counting on it." Outside, the snow continued to fall. And somewhere on the far side of the village, a dark-coated figure stood at a frost-covered window, watching the lamplight burn in the room above the tanner's workshop, and sent a carefully worded message north on the fastest horse available. The message Crest sent north came back with an answer in 3 days. Willa didn't know this yet. She was learning other things. Leander had not left after that night in the narrow entry. Not immediately, and not quietly. By the following morning, 2 of his people had arrived in Ashenvale. A woman named Sable, compact and watchful, with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of economy of movement that spoke of someone trained to be ready at all times, and a man called Rook, broad-shouldered and slow to speak, who had the specific patience of someone who had learned that most situations resolved themselves if you waited long enough. They took rooms at the inn without explanation, and their presence settled over the village like a low change in weather, noticeable, not yet alarming. Sable, Willa discovered quickly, did not like her. This was communicated not through rudeness, but through the particular precision of someone withholding warmth as a deliberate position. She spoke to Willa when necessary, answered questions with the minimum number of words required, and had a way of placing herself between Willa and Leander in conversation that was probably unconscious, and probably wasn't. On the second morning, while Leander was speaking with Rook near the well, Willa set down her market basket and looked at Sable directly. "You think this is a mistake," Willa said. Sable returned the look without flinching. "I think," she said carefully, "that the king has made decisions in the last 4 days that he would not have made 2 weeks ago. And I think change that happens quickly in a man who does not change quickly is worth paying attention to." "You're protecting him," Willa said. "I'm always protecting him. From me." Sable was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, but an adjustment. A small recalibration. "From anything that could be used against him," she said. "He has enemies who are skilled at finding the things he cares about and applying pressure there." She paused. "He hasn't cared about anything outside of duty for a long time. That made him very difficult to threaten." Another pause, waited. "It no longer does." Willa absorbed this. She thought about what it meant. To be cared about by someone like Leander. To be the soft place in an otherwise unassailable person. She wasn't sure if the thought frightened her or moved her. Possibly both. "I'm not a threat to him," she said. "No," Sable agreed, and the word carried a complexity that suggested the sentence continued beyond what she was willing to say aloud. On the 3rd day, Leander took her to the edge of the Ashenvale wood in the early afternoon, when the light was at its best, pale gold and thin, casting long blue shadows across the snow. He had asked if she would walk with him, and she had said yes before thinking too carefully about it. which was becoming a pattern she noticed without yet deciding to change. He told her more about her mother's line as they walked, not in the manner of a lecture, but in the manner of someone returning something that had been wrongly taken, carefully, with attention to how it was received. The Voss bloodkeepers had served the northern packs for generations, he explained, not as leaders or warriors, but as something rarer, anchors. Their gift was not power over others, but clarity within themselves, a kind of emotional truthfulness that extended outward, that other wolves could feel without being able to explain. In their presence, deceptions became harder to maintain, bonds became clearer. The truth of a thing rose to the surface the way cream rises. It was not magic, exactly. It was more like precision of perception, passed through blood. Your mother would have felt things others missed, Leander said. Read a room without knowing she was reading it. Known when someone was lying before they finished the sentence. Willa walked in silence for a moment. I always thought that was just paying attention, she said. It is, he said. Paying attention at a depth most people can't reach. She thought about Edmund, and about how some part of her had known, not the fact of Syrah, but the shape of something wrong, for months before the wedding. She had told herself she was inventing it. She had told herself she was anxious and insecure and reading too much into small silences. My mother never told me, she said. She wanted you free of it, Leander said. There was no judgment in his voice. It's a defensible choice. The gift makes you visible to people who collect such things. She chose your safety over your knowledge. She chose for me, Willa said, and the words came out with an edge she hadn't planned. Yes, he said simply, and didn't try to soften it. She appreciated that. She appreciated it more than she had words for. They had stopped near the frozen stream where they had first spoken. She hadn't directed them there consciously, but the path had come this way, and she hadn't redirected it. The ice was the same pale blue, the snow the same patient white. It looked the same as it had 4 days ago, and she was considerably different. You knew, she said, looking at the ice. When you saw me here the first time, you knew what I was. I recognized the bloodline signature, he said. It's distinct if you know what to feel for. But I didn't know you. He was quiet for a moment. Those are different things. And now? He stood beside her, looking at the frozen water, close enough that the warmth of him was perceptible through the cold air. Now I know that you use practicality as armor, he said, and that your armor is very good, and that underneath it you feel things more accurately than almost anyone I have ever met. He paused. And I know that someone broke something in you 4 days ago, and that you are not going to let it show, but it's there. Willa's jaw tightened. Don't, she said quietly. I'm not asking you to show it, he said. I'm telling you I see it. Those are different things, too. The wind moved through the pines above them, knocking loose a soft cascade of snow that fell in silence around their feet. Willa stared at the stream and thought about being seen, about what it meant to be looked at by someone who was not looking for a reflection of themselves, or a convenient shape, or a bloodline, but simply looking at her, at Willa, at the actual person standing on the frozen bank. It was terrifying. She understood, in that moment, why her mother had run. She also understood that running had its limits. Dorian fell, she said, redirecting herself back to solid ground. Tell me more about him. Leander accepted the change without comment. He was Northern Pack nobility 20 years ago, he said, ambitious in the way that tips into something darker when it's disappointed often enough. He wanted a seat at the council that governs the Pack territories. He was refused, more than once, because his methods were questionable. He disappeared from formal record about 12 years ago. His voice cooled slightly, the tone of a man recounting something that had cost him. He reappeared 3 years ago, collecting. Old bloodlines, old artifacts, people with rare gifts, building leverage, as I said. But I've been receiving reports from the border territories of something more structured than simple collection. He is building a claim. A claim to what? To the northern territories, Leander said. If he can demonstrate control over bloodlines old enough and rare enough, certain ancient pack laws would recognize his right to challenge. It's an obscure path to power, rarely used because the pieces are almost impossible to assemble. He looked at her. Almost. Willa understood. She was a piece. The last piece, perhaps. Or a significant one. The Voss Bloodkeeper line, which everyone had believed extinguished, suddenly alive and findable, and currently standing in an unguarded mountain village, with no pack affiliation and no protection. How long do we have? She asked. Crest sent a message 3 days ago, Leander said. We have perhaps 2 days before whoever receives it can act. Willa turned to look at him fully. You knew about the message. Rook intercepted a copy, he said. I didn't want to tell you before I'd told you the rest. I didn't want the urgency to become the story. She held his gaze. And what is the story? The story, he said, is that you are not what happened to you 4 days ago at that altar. You are not what Crest made you think you were. Isolated and unimportant. You are not a piece to be collected. His voice was even, but beneath the evenness, she heard something she was learning to recognize. The specific weight of words from a man who chose them carefully and meant them precisely. And whatever comes next, I will not allow you to face it without every advantage I am capable of providing. Willa looked at him for a long moment. At the gold eyes, steady as always. At the scar along his jaw. At the man who had given her his name without his title, and crouched to her eye level in her narrow hallway and said, Because I would like to, as though it were the most natural reason in the world. 2 days, she said. 2 days, he confirmed. She turned back toward the village. Then we shouldn't waste them. They walked back through the snow together, their footprints parallel in the white, and neither of them spoke, and the silence was not empty but full. The particular fullness of 2 people who have said something important and are still feeling the shape of it settle into place. Behind them, the frozen stream caught the last afternoon light and held it, briefly, before the clouds moved in, and the gray returned and the forest went still again, waiting. The first sign came before dawn. Willa woke to the smell of something wrong. Not smoke, not blood, but a particular sharpness in the air, metallic and cold, like iron left too long in rain. She had grown up in Ashenvale, and knew its smells the way she knew the sound of her own heartbeat. This wasn't one of them. She was dressed and down the stairs before she had fully decided to be. The lane outside was empty and pre-dawn dark, the snow still and unmarked except for a single set of boot prints leading from the direction of the inn, fresh ones. She followed them with her eyes, and found Sable standing 10 feet away in the shadow of the workshop's overhang, already watching the far end of the lane with the focused stillness of someone who has been awake for hours. You felt it, Sable said. Not a question. Something's wrong, Willa said. Sable looked at her. A different look than any she had given before. Not the careful withholding. Something closer to reluctant reassessment. 3 men came through the North Pass last night, she said. Rook tracked them to the edge of the village. They're not traveling merchants. Fell's men, almost certainly. Sable's jaw tightened. The pass has been closed since first snow. For men to come through it anyway means they were motivated enough to risk it, or desperate enough. Either way. She paused. They're here earlier than we expected. Where is Leander? Speaking with Rook. He'll want to know you're awake. She said it without her previous edge, and Willa understood that something had shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the beginning of a mutual recognition. 2 people who were both, in their different ways, trying to protect the same thing. Go tell him, Willa said. I'll stay visible, If they're watching the village, a change in routine will alert them. Sable studied her for a moment. Then she nodded, once, and moved into the dark, like she'd been made from it. Leander found her 20 minutes later at the market well, drawing water in the ordinary way of a woman beginning her ordinary day. The sky just beginning to lighten at its eastern edge to the deep blue that preceded dawn in the mountains. He came without urgency in his step, which she had learned meant the urgency was internal, contained and managed, not absent. "You should be inside," he said quietly, stopping beside her. "If someone is watching, inside looks like hiding," she said. "Hiding looks like I know something. I don't want them to know I know something." He was quiet for a moment. "You've thought about this." "I've been awake for an hour." He took the rope from her hands and drew the bucket up himself, not as an assertion, but as a simple, practical act. And the ease of it, the way he moved into the space beside her without announcement or ceremony, did something to her chest that she set aside firmly for later consideration. Rook identified one of the men, he said, voice low. "He goes by the name Garrett. He works as an advance agent, comes into a location before Fell's main group, confirms the target is present, removes complications." "Removes," Willa said. "Quietly," Leander said. "He has a preference for making things look accidental." Willa thought about the metallic smell in the air before dawn. She thought about her mother's grave on the hill above the village, 3 winters old, and wondered, with a cold clarity that surprised her, whether Helene Voss had truly died of a fever. She must have gone very still, because Leander set the water bucket down and turned to face her. "What is it?" he asked. She told him what she was thinking. She said it plainly, without drama, because it was the kind of thought that became more bearable when spoken plainly. He listened without interrupting. His expression did not change, but his eyes did. A subtle deepening, the gold going darker at the center, the way firelight changes when the fire strengthens. "I don't know," he said honestly. "It's possible. Fell has been operating for 12 years. Your mother died 9 years ago." He paused. "I'm sorry. I don't know, and I won't tell you I do." She nodded, set it aside. There was a time for grief, and it was not while Garrett and his associates were somewhere in Ashen Vale removing complications. "What do we do?" she asked. "We draw them into the open," he said. "On our terms, not theirs, in a space we control." He looked at her steadily. "And I need to tell you something before we do. Something I should have told you sooner." She waited. "The bond recognition the Voss line carries," he said carefully. "It works in 2 directions. A bloodkeeper can see the truth of a bond in others. But they can also, if the bond is real, and present, and close, feel it in themselves." He held her gaze. "You have been feeling something since the frozen stream, Willa. I know you have. I know because I have been feeling it too. And I want you to understand that I am telling you this not to use it as an instrument. Not to make you feel obligated or managed or moved in a direction you haven't chosen." The words came careful and deliberate, each one placed with precision. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know what it is. What you're feeling is real, and it's yours. Whatever you do with it belongs entirely to you." The sky was fully blue now, the first gray light spreading across the snow. A rooster somewhere in the village announced the hour. The ordinary world continued its ordinary turning. Willa thought about what he was telling her. Not the words. She understood the words, but the shape beneath them. A man who could have said nothing and simply let her feel a connection she couldn't explain, who could have allowed her confusion to work in his favor, who had instead chosen to hand her the key and step back from the door. "You're making it very difficult," she said quietly, to maintain a reasonable amount of caution. "I know," he said. And the almost smile was there again, gentle and brief. "I'm sorry for that." "No, you're not." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." Crest found her an hour later. She was returning to the workshop when she heard him behind her. His particular footstep. The slight drag of his left boot that she had known her whole life and never thought anything of until now, when every detail of him felt suddenly readable in a way it hadn't before. "Willa," he said, and his voice was the one she knew, warm, avuncular, the voice of almost family. "A word?" She turned. He stood in the lane with his dark coat and his careful face, and his eyes that were doing the thing she recognized now as calculation, wearing the mask of concern. "Of course," she said pleasantly. "I've heard there's a stranger in the village," he said. "Asking questions. Spending time with you." He let this sit for a moment. "I only want to make sure you're all right. Given everything with Edmund and the wedding. You've had a difficult few days. I wouldn't want someone taking advantage of that." Willa looked at him, really looked at him, the way she was apparently capable of looking at things, with that depth her mother had given her and never explained. He was frightened, she realized. Beneath the calculation, beneath the performance of concern, there was fear, real fear, the kind that comes from knowing something is closing in. And beneath the fear, worse, there was intention. The particular tension of someone who has already decided what they're going to do and is buying time before doing it. "I appreciate your concern," she said, and smiled the same way she had smiled all her life in Ashenvale. Practical, unrevealing, her mother's daughter. "I'm perfectly all right." His eyes moved over her face, looking for something he didn't find. "Good," he said. "Good." He paused. "You'll come to me if you need anything?" "Of course," she said. He nodded and moved away down the lane, and she watched him go with the smile still on her face until he turned the corner, and then she exhaled and turned and found Sable standing 2 feet behind her, silent as snowfall. "He's going to move tonight," Sable said quietly. "I'd bet my life on it." "So would I," Willa said. She looked down the empty lane where her uncle by almost had disappeared, and she thought about her mother saying she doesn't know and she won't. And she thought about what it meant to have been protected so carefully from a truth that found her anyway. And she thought about frozen streams and gold eyes, and a man who had handed her a key and stepped back from the door. "Tell Leander," she said. "Tell him I'm ready." Sable looked at her for a long moment, and this time, what was in her expression was not withholding and not assessment. It was something simpler and harder to come by. Respect. "I'll tell him," she said. They were ready before nightfall. Leander had chosen the site carefully. The old granary at the northern edge of Ashenvale, a wide stone building that had stood empty since the previous harvest, far enough from the nearest houses that whatever happened inside its walls would not pull innocent people into it, close enough to the village center that fleeing would be complicated for anyone trying to leave in a hurry. Rook had spent the afternoon inside it, moving through the space with the quiet thoroughness of a man who understood that preparation was the difference between a plan and a prayer. Sable had positioned herself on the roof of the cooper's workshop across the lane, invisible in her dark clothing against the darker sky, patient as stone. Leander stood with Willa inside the granary, in the amber light of a single lantern hung from a ceiling beam, and they waited. "You don't have to be here for this part," he said. He had said it once already, and she had not answered then either. "Crest is my family," she said. "Almost. The confrontation belongs to me as much as to you." He accepted this, because he had learned quickly that there was a category of argument with Willa that existed beyond winning and losing, where the conversation simply ended and the decision stood. The cold inside the granary was deep and still, the cold of stone that has absorbed months of winter and holds it the way old wood holds old smoke. Willa's breath fogged faintly in the lantern light. She had dressed practically, her heaviest wool dress, her risoled boots, her hair braided back in the way of someone who has decided to be unencumbered. No flowers. They heard the footsteps before the door opened. More than one set. Crest had not come alone. 3 men entered first, Garrett among them, recognizable from Rook's description. Medium height, unremarkable face, the particular ease of someone accustomed to walking into situations that ended badly for other people. 2 others flanked him, heavy-set and careful-eyed. Crest came last. He stopped when he saw Leander standing in the lantern light. Something moved across his face. Surprise, rapidly reorganizing itself into calculation. He was good at that. He had been doing it for a lifetime. "I wondered if you knew," Crest said. His voice was still the warm, avuncular one, performing reasonableness at force of habit. "How much?" "Enough," Leander said. Crest's eyes moved to Willa, and there, beneath the calculation, clearly visible to her now in a way it hadn't been before, the way all things were becoming visible with a clarity she was still learning to trust, was something that might have been regret if it hadn't been so thoroughly overruled by everything else. "Your mother asked me to look after you," Crest said to her. "I want you to know that. Whatever else, that part was real." "And then Fell found you," Willa said, "and looking after me became something different." A pause. He didn't deny it. "He has resources I needed, debts I couldn't pay any other way." He spread his hands, a gesture she recognized from council meetings, the gesture of a man presenting an argument he knows is insufficient. "I tried to keep you out of it as long as I could. The business with Edmund. I needed you. Isolated," she said. "Yes," Leander explained. Something hardened in Crest's face at that. The performance of reasonableness dropped a degree. "You don't understand what Fell is building," he said. And now the voice was different. Lower, tighter, the voice beneath the voice. "He'll have the Northern Territories within 2 years regardless of what you do here tonight. He has the pieces. All he needs is the Bloodkeeper confirmation, and the challenge is legitimate under pack law. If you're standing with him when he makes it, you'll be protected. If you're standing against him..." He let the sentence end where it ended. "You came here to collect me," Willa said. "I came here to offer you a choice." "That's not a choice," she said. "That's a direction with consequences attached." Leander had not moved or spoken during this exchange. He had the quality, she had noticed, of occupying space in a way that didn't require assertion. His presence simply registered, the way temperature registers, and the 3 men near the door had been very aware of it since the moment they walked in. Garrett had not moved toward anything. His companions had not moved at all. Now Leander spoke, and his voice was the even, quiet one that was not quiet at all. "Dorian Fell has been detained," he said. The room changed. Crest's face went very still. "That's not possible," he said carefully. "He's in the north." "He was in the north," Leander said. "My people reached him 4 days ago. I received confirmation this morning." He held Crest's gaze with the particular steadiness of someone who has no need to perform certainty, because the certainty is simply true. The claim he was building has no foundation without the bloodline pieces he collected, and those pieces are being returned to their families. The challenge he planned cannot be made. It's done. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a structure collapsing. Not loudly, but comprehensively. Garrett moved, as Willa had expected he would. Not toward Leander. Even Garrett's particular brand of practical courage had limits. But toward the door, the instinct of a man whose employer has just ceased to be relevant. He made it 2 steps before Rook appeared from the shadows in the corner of the granary where he had been standing still as a support beam for the better part of an hour, and Garrett stopped. The 2 others stopped also. Crest did not move. He stood in the lantern light, with his dark coat and his careful face, and the look of a man watching the architecture of 10 years of work come apart in a single conversation. He looked older suddenly, not villainous. She had expected to see something colder when it came to this, something she could hate cleanly. But old and tired and afraid. The way people look when the thing they built their safety on turns out to have been sand. Willa looked at him. She let herself feel what she felt, fully, and without managing it, the grief of it, because whatever else was true, he was the closest thing to family she had remaining in the world, and he had spent years arranging her life like furniture to suit someone else's purposes. The anger. The dim, complicated sorrow for her mother, who had trusted him with the secret of her daughter's nature, and had been failed by that trust. "My mother asked you to look after me," Willa said quietly. "You said that. Whatever else, that part was real." "Yes," Crest said. "Then do one thing she would have wanted," Willa said. "Tell me the truth, all of it, from the beginning." He looked at her for a long moment, and then, in the amber light of the single lantern, with the snow falling soft and silent outside the granary walls, the old man in the dark coat sat down on a wooden crate and began to talk. He talked for a long time. Willa listened to all of it. Her mother's flight from the Northern Territories, young and frightened and determined. Crest's knowledge, inherited through his wife, her mother's sister. The years of silence, genuinely kept, genuinely meant. And then Fell's arrival in his life 8 years ago, smooth and resourceful, with documents and debts, and the particular skill of someone who knew how to find the loose thread in a person and pull. He had resisted longer than she might have expected. She gave him that privately, because accuracy mattered more than comfort. Her mother's death, he confirmed, had been fever. Fell had not reached Crest until the year after. The knowledge would have comforted her more if she'd had it a day earlier, before the wondering had set in, but she accepted it and filed it away. When he finished, the granary was colder, and the lantern had burned lower, and Garrett and his companions had been relieved of their weapons and were sitting in the far corner being watched with calm competence by Rook. Willa stood up. She looked at Crest. "I won't pretend this is something it isn't," she said. "You made choices. They had consequences." She paused. "But I also know that the council will deal with you, and Leander's people will deal with Fell's network, and I don't need to be the one who decides what happens next. That's not mine to carry." She walked to the granary door. Then she stopped and turned back. "My mother built a quiet life," she said. "She built it out of fear, which I understand now. I won't build mine out of fear." She held his gaze one last moment. "That's the difference between us." She pushed open the door and walked out into the snow. The night was deep and clear, the clouds that had covered the sky for days finally broken apart, the stars visible and sharp in the cold. Willa stood in the lane outside the granary and breathed the mountain air, pine and frost and the clean smell of fresh snow, and felt the night settle around her. Leander came out a moment later. He stood beside her and looked up at the same sky she was looking at. "It's over," he said. "Yes," she said. They stood in silence for a while. Not the silence of things unfinished, but the silence of a long breath finally released. "You should know," Leander said eventually, "that there is no obligation. Whatever you have felt, whatever the bond has made present, your life is your own. I am not a man who collects things, Willa. I'm not Fell." He looked at her. "If you want to stay in Ashenvale and live quietly and have nothing to do with northern packs or bloodlines or kings, I will make sure you are protected, and I will respect that choice, and I will not ask anything of you." Willa looked at the stars for a moment longer. "And if I don't want to stay in Ashenvale?" she asked. The stillness beside her changed quality. "Then I would like very much," he said carefully, "to show you what the world looks like from the north." She turned to look at him, at the gold eyes and the scar, and the man who had come to a small mountain village on a matter of duty, and had crouched to her eye level in a narrow hallway, and offered something that had nothing to do with duty at all. "I've never been north," she said. "I know," he said. "I have very little to pack." "I know that too." She held his gaze. "I'm not easy to manage." "Willa," he said, and his voice held something she recognized now without needing to question it. Warm and certain and entirely genuine. "I know." She left Ashenvale 2 days later, In the early morning, when the light was new and pale gold and the mountains stood blue and enormous against a clear sky, she carried one bag, her mother's old traveling bag, worn leather with a brass clasp, which she had found in a trunk beneath her cot and had not opened until the night before, when she had found inside it a folded letter in her mother's handwriting that began, "My darling Willa, if you are reading this, then the world has found you, as I always feared it would, and I hope you are braver than I was, which I believe you are." She had read the letter 3 times. She had folded it and put it in the bag, and carried it with her. Sable waited with the horses at the edge of the village. Their breath made clouds in the cold air, patient and steady. Rook was already mounted, looking at the mountain road with the expression of a man who is comfortable going anywhere. Sable caught Willa's eye when she approached and gave her a nod. Small, deliberate, meaning considerably more than its size suggested. Willa nodded back. Leander helped her mount without ceremony, his hand at her elbow for a brief moment, warm through her wool sleeve. Then he swung onto his own horse, and they turned north, toward the pass, toward whatever came after the story you have told yourself your whole life about who you are and what you're worth. Willa did not look back at Ashenvale. Not because she didn't care, but because she had already said her goodbyes. To the tanner's workshop, to the frozen stream, to the small grave on the hill where Helene Voss slept 3 winters deep in mountain earth. She had said them quietly and privately, the way her mother would have, practical and true. She rode north with the mountain wind in her face, and her mother's bag on her back, and a letter she had already memorized, pressed close to her heart. Epilogue. Spring came late to the Northern Territories, as it always did, reluctant and gray at first, testing, before committing to warmth. When it came completely. The snowmelt rushing down from the high ridges and bright cold streams. The pine forest filling with the sound of water and birdsong, and the particular smell of earth that has been frozen a long time finally opening. Willa stood at the window of the north tower of Leander's keep. Her window now, by choice and by the slow, unforced accumulation of months, and watched the valley below wake from winter. She was learning the Northern Territories the way she had learned the tanner's accounts. Methodically, with attention to detail, finding satisfaction in understanding a complex thing. The packs that had seemed distant and political and abstract had become, gradually, people, with histories and loyalties and grievances and extraordinary capacity for stubborn tradition, all of which she was slowly learning to navigate. She was good at it turned out. Better than she expected. The depth of perception her blood carried, which she was still learning, still discovering the edges of, made her effective in ways that surprised the pack council, and did not, she had noticed, surprise Leander at all. Sable had become something she hadn't expected either. Not a friend, exactly. They were too different for easy friendship. But something perhaps more durable. An ally with a shared language. 2 practical women in a world that sometimes forgot practical women were paying attention. Crest had been dealt with by the village council of Ashenvale, as she had said he would be. He had lost his position and was living quietly in the village under certain conditions of restriction. She had received this information in a letter from old Etta, the healer, who had taken it upon herself to write monthly dispatches that were approximately 40% medical opinion, 30% village gossip, and 30% unsolicited advice addressed directly to Willa's life choices. She looked forward to them considerably. Fell's network had taken months to fully dismantle. Some of the collected bloodlines had been returned to their families, as Leander had said. Others required more complicated resolutions. Willa had been part of several of those conversations, sitting at the council table with the Northern Pack representatives, offering perspectives that cut through the layers of political performance to the human truth underneath. It was useful. It was also exhausting in the way that caring about things is always exhausting, and she had told Leander so, and he had listened the way he always listened, completely, without planning his response while she was still speaking, and had then taken her walking in the forest outside the keep until she felt like herself again. He was good at knowing when she needed that. She was good at knowing when he needed the silence of someone simply being present without asking him to perform. They were, she had decided, well matched in the ways that mattered, and interestingly mismatched in the ways that kept things from being dull. She heard his step on the tower stairs now. She knew it as well as she had ever known anything, the unhurried weight of it. And then he was in the doorway, and the room felt different in the particular way it always did. "The valley looks like itself again," she said, without turning. "It does," he said, coming to stand beside her at the window. Below them, the first green was pushing up through the valley floor, pale and determined. "How are you?" It was a question he asked genuinely, which she had learned to answer genuinely. "Settled," she said, and considered the word as she said it. It was the right word. Not the settled of resignation. The settled of something that has found its level, that has stopped searching for where it belongs because it has arrived. "I feel settled." He looked at her with the gold eyes that she no longer found unnerving and still found remarkable. "Good," he said. And the word was simple and unornamented and meant everything he didn't add to it. Willa looked out at the green valley and the bright cold streams and the sky clearing slowly to blue above the pine ridges. She thought about her mother's letter, "Braver than I was, which I believe you are," and thought that perhaps bravery was not the right word for what had happened. Bravery suggested a choice made despite fear. What she had done felt less like defying fear and more like simply choosing truth, again and again, until the fear stopped being the loudest thing in the room. She reached across and took Leander's hand. He turned his palm up immediately, without hesitation, closing his fingers around hers with the ease of something long practiced and privately cherished. They stood together at the window, while the valley below them continued its ancient, patient return to warmth. There was nothing more to wait for, nothing coming that had not already arrived. The story had found its ending, not in the sudden, dramatic way of cliffs and precipices, but in the quiet, certain way of water finding ground, completely, without remainder, and without any possibility of going back.